Good afternoon. If I can ask everybody to take their seats. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Curtis Thayer, and I serve as the President and CEO of the Alaska Chamber. And we are back in Fairbanks, and I want to thank you for your warm hospitality. I want to thank our gubernatorial candidates for making this a sold-out luncheon. And this is also being live streamed through GCI. I would like to thank our sponsors today, Matson, Fountainhead Development, and MAC Federal Credit Union. If I could have a round of applause for them. A lot of people ask, what is the Alaska Chamber? But I think the best way to do it is I'll sum it up in 60 seconds. And if we can cue it, please look to the video screens. Here we go, hopefully. Why don't we do a safety moment? As we go forward, just please locate...
Politicians and bureaucrats in Juneau make decisions that impact it. Do you believe they understand your business? That's what I thought, and that's why business leaders like you created the Alaska Chamber. The Alaska Chamber fights for a business climate that keeps you competitive. We're on the ground 24/7, 365, advocating policy, delivering results, holding policymakers accountable. A stronger economy means stronger communities. You'd think that's common sense, but not everyone agrees. Politicians hear from many groups with different ideas, and you can't afford to be silent. Because when businesses take action, Alaska will lead. When it comes to creating jobs, streamlining government, developing our resources, and building a better business climate, we can't do it alone. We win when we work together. Help secure Alaska's future. Join the Alaska Chamber.
There's our 60-second Who We Are elevator speech. Just for a safety moment, please locate the exits nearest you. There's one back, here towards the front, if there is a problem. One thing I would like to acknowledge, just by way of a hands, of the board members of not only the Alaska Chamber, but the Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce in the room today. These individuals spend countless volunteer hours advocating for business, and I want to thank them for their service. Also, we have a lot of elected officials in the room, and I didn't catch all of them as they were coming in. So if I could have the elected officials stand. Thank you very much for your service. And what is a chamber event without a raffle? When you leave today, you can buy a raffle ticket for Alaska Airlines, 2 tickets anywhere they fly, $25 for 1 ticket, $100 for 5 tickets, and the drawing will be tomorrow at lunch. There's also a silent auction right outside the room here that you're more than welcome to wander through and bid, and you don't have to be a member of the Alaska Chamber. We'll take anybody's money, and we do appreciate that. And I would like to invite up to the stage Marissa Sherrod with the Greater Fairbanks Chamber of Commerce. She's done an outstanding job hosting us today, and I would like her to introduce Andrew Jensen, our moderator for today's debate. Thank you.
I'm going to take advantage of the microphone and this large audience to pitch. We do have a table with Stand for Alaska swag. Please feel free to take as much of it as you want back to your staff, your friends and family. The Fairbanks Chamber and the Alaska Chamber have both been strong advocates to oppose ballot measure 1, and we hope that you would join us in that. Thank you. Moderating today's Gubernatorial Forum is Andrew Jensen. Andrew has been the managing editor of the Alaska Journal of Commerce since 2012, after joining the paper in 2010 as a reporter. He began his career covering collegiate sports in 1998 and has covered the business world since 2007. He is also a member of the Alaska Daily News editorial board following the purchase of the journal by the Binkley Company this past February. I've had the privilege of attending forums moderated by Andrew in the past, and I'm happy to have him here in Fairbanks for this very important forum. Please join me in welcoming Andrew to the podium.
Thank you, and thank you, Curtis and Brandy and everyone with the Chamber and the Fairbanks Chamber for having me up tonight. I really do appreciate it. Certainly a lot's changed in a week, and as everyone is well aware, and certainly a lot's changed in the past year. I think it was about this time last year I was in Sitka on a sightseeing boat moderating, I think, the first governor candidate forum, and it was Charlie Huggins and Scott Hawkins, Mike Chenault, and Governor Walker. So obviously, all four of those are no longer in the race, and of course, in the last week we're down to 2 with 13 days to go. So I appreciate Mark Begich and Mike Dunleavy being here. So everyone could please give us a round of applause for our 2 candidates. So just to go over the ground rules, each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to each question, and then we do have some questions that are specific to each candidate, and they will have 1 minute to respond to that question. There will be a 30-second rebuttal from the opposing candidate, and then a 30-second response from the candidate who received the original question. And then we also have a lightning round on taxes later on in the debates, so you can look forward to that to see where the yes or no they come down on those. So through a virtual coin flip, being 2018 earlier, Mike Dunleavy won that toss and elected to go last in the closing statements. So we will have him go first for opening statements.
Ready?
Yes, you have 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the Chamber. It's a pleasure to be here today. Just want to let everyone know that I'm here at this debate. Mark, I'm here next to you. A lot has changed in the last week. It's been a very interesting week. We got 13 days left for an election, and it's going to determine Alaska's future. It truly is. And so obviously I want all of you to get out and vote early. But we got to look at Alaska and what is it that we want for the future? Do we want an Alaska that is going to continue to grow, produce our resources, explore more for resources? Are we going to be an Alaska that doesn't tax you necessarily to pay for somebody else's pet project? Are we going to be an Alaska that is free of crime to the extent that we can? Are we going to be an Alaska that's going to have educational outcomes that we need? This is what's at stake for Alaska. This is why I'm running. I would appreciate your vote on November 6th or beforehand, and get ready because I think you're going to see some pretty interesting advertisement going on the next couple days. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunleavy. Mr. Begich?
Thank you very much. Thanks to the Chamber. And Mike, I'm glad you're here. Missed you yesterday at the youth vote debate with Channel 2, but that's another story. But again, thank you all very much. You know, we do live in a time now in politics where literally I don't watch evening news anymore because it's so toxic. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party, whatever you pick. It's an environment that has turned where it's just one side versus the other side and not focused on the problems that we face as a state and as a country. The reason I ran for governor was I believe that we have the ability to solve incredible problems. We have the highest unemployment, highest crime rate. We're lowest in education, 46 out of 50 states. But we must work together no matter who you are, where you are, and what party you're from. That is what is needed. Alaska has done this time and time again. That's what I want to do as governor. I'm anxious for these questions today, and I'm glad it was a sold-out audience today.
Thank you, Mr. Begich. Okay, so with the first question, Mr. Dunleavy will go first. If elected, will your first budget include a capital budget that is larger than simply federal matching funds? And if so, how large of a capital budget would you propose, and how would you fund it, and how would you address the backlog that's estimated at about $2 billion for deferred maintenance?
So thanks for the question. So we certainly need to build Alaska, and the problem has been for the past couple of years, our operating budget has been growing at about 5% a year. Last year, the overall budget was 13% a year. This year we're in now, 13% with federal funds. This is totally unsustainable, and what happens is it eats away at your capital projects, your capital budget. So unless we get that operating budget under control, we really are going to have a tough time having a capital budget going forward. We obviously can work some projects through ADA. We can have a discussion potentially about bonding, but in the end, if we're just throwing debt on top of debt without reducing our operating budgets, it's going to be a problem creating a future for Alaska in terms of resource development. So one of the things I want to do as soon as I get in there is take a look at the programs, the operating budget, see what we can reduce, how we can become more efficient, and get some capital for a capital budget. We're going to have to take a look at the budget first, quickly, do some quick audits, see what's available, and try and put something together so we can start building Alaska again.
It's on? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Dunleavy. But I just wanted to just sort of clarify, so you will wait to introduce a capital budget until you look at the numbers?
My goal is to have a capital budget. We're going to move quickly after November 6th, look at the budget, and see where we can free up some money for a capital budget.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Begich, same question for you. Will you introduce a capital budget? How large would it be, and how would you fund it and deal with the maintenance backlog?
Well, first, the answer is yes, and here's why. First off, we spend on the state level about $140 million on an average per year. Even when this bad economy occurred and the budget was reduced so far, on an average, on the low end, about $140 million. My proposal, it's on my website, baggage.com, is to take 70 to 100 million of that, utilize it for a GO bond. The state is the only group that pays cash for all their capital. I've been in business a long time. Major capital, you borrow against and utilize the low rates as possible and spread it over time. So I proposed a 6-year capital budget that I would bring forward to the legislature for a GO bond in 2019 by mail-in ballot. Why do you have to do this? Because we have a backlog, as you mentioned, of incredible deferred maintenance, but also you can leverage this resource against local projects that are out there. That's my goal. That would be about a $2 billion 6-year plan, and also the reason you do it over 6 years, so you don't overinflate the economy, you spread it over a period of time, and you don't have fly-by-night companies coming in from the lower 48 taking our jobs. That's how I would do it.
Thank you, Mr. Begich, and we'll go to you first on this second question. Do you intend to propose, or is your goal to propose, knowing that you will obviously inherit the OMB numbers from the outgoing administration, but do you intend to propose a balanced budget in December, either using savings or new revenue, or what is that your goal to introduce a balanced budget?
Well, you have to bring a balanced budget forward, and I would say this, the way it works is the governor has to bring forward the budget that's the current governor, so you kind of inherit it. It's kind of an adopted budget. So that will be the work that I have to work off of. So my assumption is it will be a balanced budget. It may, I don't know what he's planning to do on revenues or savings, but the goal is you got to get through this first year to deal with the longer term plan. There may be utilization of some of those constitutional budget reserve just to plug it while we're figuring this out, but I'll inherit the budget and then we got to deal with it. But the real issue is the budget in 2020. That has to be a sustainable budget, not utilizing one-time money in savings accounts, because if you do that, we will pay the price down the road. So mine would be take what we have, work it for the first session, and then build a longer-term plan on a 2-year budget cycle.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy, same question. Recognizing you'll be inheriting the previous administration's work, and if there is still a projected shortfall, would you propose using that with savings or new revenues, or how would you deal with that budget when you inherit it?
Well, certainly we have to have a balanced budget, and if oil holds in the $70 range, $75 range, which is not something we want to bank on long term, of course, we're looking at about $3.1 billion in additional revenue, I should say. And we'll take the budget that the governor gives us. We're going to take a look at it, go through it line by line as quickly as possible. Through the transition period, we'll begin this process. And we're going to make sure that we prioritize our spending, public safety first, education, transportation, and management of our natural resources. Some of the other things will have to be up for negotiation. Some of the other things may not be put in that budget, and so we can have a discussion with the legislature going forward. But we are bound and determined to have a balanced budget. If we need to, we'll use some of the savings out of the Constitutional Budget Reserve, the statutory budget reserve. But I can tell you this, during this year and then going into the summer, we're going to take this budget apart piece by piece. We're going to come up with a budget that's going to be lean and mean, be more responsive to Alaskans, be more responsive to folks that want to invest in Alaska. And going into next year, we're going to have a budget that's actually going to work for Alaska.
Thank you, Mr. Dunleavy. And you'll go first on this next question. Mental health services are really in a crisis in Alaska, and the recent reports, certainly concerning the Alaska Psychiatric Institute, are fairly disturbing. So what is your plan for addressing this issue?
API is in the paper almost every other day, it seems. Our health and social services programs are not being managed well. It almost seems like things are falling apart before our eyes. The thing we have to do is manage this government better, and that's what has not occurred the last several years. You have to manage your resources better. You have to manage for outcomes. It's just not inputs. It's just not going to the legislature and asking for more money and then forgetting or just allowing those programs to manage themselves. You have to have a manager in there that wants to have explicit outcomes. And this goes for our mental health programs. Right now, we're having people released from API. People are going into jails, walking on the streets, going into hospitals. This is not how you should run a state. And this is just one example of where we have this management currently going on. Manage the state well, take a look at those programs, get the right people in place, make sure they know what they're doing, and we just got to get this state heading in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Begich. Same question for you. How would you deal with the mental health crisis in Alaska?
First off, the mental health crisis in Alaska is real. I was just over at the Fairbanks Memorial Hospital, and 8 of their emergency rooms are filled with individuals that should be situated in API, and they're having enormous costs for this situation. I know yesterday there was an incident right here in Fairbanks. There's several elements that have to be done. First off, even if you put money into mental health services today, there's not enough people to work in this field. We have to work with our university to make sure we have the workforce to be able to work in this, from counselors to psychiatrists and other behavioral health services. Second, we actually have to put resources. API was not something new. This was happening over several years because the way the legislature dealt with it. They kept cutting and cutting, and they said, oh, don't worry, there'll be outpatient services. Well, the reality is not true. Now everyone's paying the price for it. So you have to be realistic. You're going to have some institutional facilities that have to be beefed up, and especially in this region here. Second, we have to make sure, as I mentioned, on the education front, make sure we have the workforce. And third, we do have to put resources into this. This is a crisis in this state. There is no question about it.
Thank you, Mr. Begich. And excuse me. We'll have you go first on this question. Obviously, Medicaid is one of the biggest drivers or the biggest driver of the state budget. So which, if any, optional Medicaid services that the state currently offers would you consider looking at or anything as a means to rein in the cost of the Medicaid program?
Well, I think your broad question, I can't tell you about each specific procedure, but I will tell you Medicaid is about an $800+ million cost to the state. The expansion, which I support, 90% paid by the federal government, 10% by the state. Medicaid impacts many working families across the state. Almost 200,000 people are on Medicaid. The biggest chunk of Medicaid goes to senior care, assisted living. You can't forget that. That's an important part of it. But are there savings opportunities? Absolutely. Medicaid does not do a good job on preventive health care. Just if you could get a savings of 5% on preventive health care, you'd save $40 million a year. If you change the dynamic, instead of the way it works now, pay for service, and you reverse it a little bit, change the paradigm, the end result in some of the work we've suggested could save anywhere from $150 to $250 million by reducing the paperwork load. Right now, 20 to 30% of the cost of Medicaid is shuffling paper. One item to the next. Is it a left arm? Is it a right arm? What code did we use? What code we did not use? 95% of the procedures are paid for, so let's figure a different system to make sure we cut the paperwork out of it.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunleavy, same question for you. How would you deal with the Medicaid budget, and would you look at the optional services that are currently being offered?
I think everything needs to be looked at, but again, we're going to start with managing the programs properly. We're looking at a potential $200 million supplemental, and much of that has to do with our Medicaid expansion. One of the reasons that I opposed Medicaid expansion earlier on was because I knew it was going to be built upon a faulty base, and the chickens are coming home to roost. We've got to manage all of our programs, including Medicaid expansion, better. I'm going to take a look at every program, every optional program, and we have to see if we've got the money to maintain this program. We want good health care, accessible health care for all Alaskans, but if that means we build it upon a faulty base and going forward this thing collapses, it's going to be a catastrophe for everybody. So it's got to be managed well. We're going to look at all the programs, see what we can afford, but manage it better.
Thank you. And we will lead off with you on this question, and it's sticking with healthcare, which of course is a major driver of the state budget for public employees. Do you support the concept that's being kind of kicked around right now of a healthcare authority that would bring all the public employees under a single system as a means to reduce costs or find efficiencies?
I'd prefer a voluntary pool, for example, as opposed to having a government agency, another government agency that's going to be running a massive healthcare program. Volunteer pool, we already have healthcare under Alaska Care, but also we have the opportunity to allow private businesses to pool their resources and have private plans. We can relax regulations to be able to do that better. A couple years ago, I introduced a bill that would have consolidated healthcare on a voluntary basis for school districts. There was a study done that said up to 54 school districts wanted to get together and consolidate the healthcare. It'd save upwards of $100 million. These are the things we need to look at going forward. But in terms of forcing this upon Alaskans, I question that approach. I'd prefer free market approaches to dealing with the healthcare situation and cost in Alaska.
Thank you. Mr. Begich, same question for you. Would you support the concept of a healthcare authority for public employees?
No, I do not support it. I think the state has incredible purchasing power to be utilized. You know, when I was mayor of Anchorage, we had this same problem in 2003. We were dealing with higher increase of healthcare costs, averaging 11% per year. We focused on how to create a better system. At the end of the day, we were running about a 0.5% increase every year. We actually had a month where our employees got a premium holiday because we saved so much money. We worked on the preventive end. If you said you wanted to get lower cholesterol and you met that goal, we gave you a Visa card and said, thank you very much for lowering our costs. Go spend that wherever you want. We incentivized employees. But on the issue, you know, we have to be a lot more using our power that we have from the power about employees that we have. For example, just like Connecticut did, I would have no problem in working with the legislature trying to pass legislation to allow importation of drugs from Canada. Because Connecticut's doing it, it does lower costs, there's no question about it. We have to change the paradigm here and use our purchasing power to lower the cost of healthcare, not only for our employees, but impact all of you as small business and business owners.
Thank you, and we'll lead off with you on this one. Both of you alluded to this in your opening statements as crime in Alaska, which is obviously a tremendous concern to everybody. If elected, what are the specific actions you believe you can take from that office that would be impactful? And if your ideas include more law enforcement personnel or prosecutors, which would entail potentially putting more people into prison, how do you pay for those sort of decisions, policy decisions? You're first, yes.
Well, I have a big detailed plan on my website, Begich.com, but I'll give you a couple examples of what I think would really work. You know, we see this incredible opioid addiction that's going on in our state, as well as drug trade. 80% of the people who are in corrections in our state are addicted to some sort of drug or alcohol. We have to go after these issues aggressively. For example, I would take 2 of our state prosecutors, work them with the U.S. Attorney's Office, assign them, as I did when I was mayor. I would do it as governor. Why do you do that? Because you utilize them to go after the hard drug dealers. Under federal law, they will get 10 years, no probation, and sent out of state to a federal penitentiary. Second, you need to fund wellness programs. Those programs deal with people who have addictions and get them on the right course. 90% of them that go through it end up not reoffending. I would also fill the 40 empty state trooper positions today that are fully funded right now, but not filled. 20 correction officers, fully funded, not filled. These are some of the quick ones. We only have a minute, but I think crime is a big issue. Begich.com gives you a lot more detail.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy, same question for you. How would you deal with crime? And if you need more resources, how would you pay for those?
Thank you. About 2 weeks ago, we were endorsed by the Public Safety Association, which includes the troopers, airport police, et cetera, because they believe that we'll have a plan that's going to actually work for Alaska. We have about 2,000 positions as of June 28th that were not filled in state government. They were funded but not filled. This would be one of the first things we take a look at, is how we can take some of those resources in those funded but not filled positions and move them over to public safety to get more troopers, get more prosecuting attorneys, make sure the courts are open all day on Friday, and also look at substance abuse aversion programs and helping people get off of the addictions. We have to make public safety job number one. So when we develop a budget, you develop a budget with the actual resources you need in that budget for public safety. And as you work down the line through education, transportation, and management of natural resources, there may be some other things that don't get funded, like a fast rail study from Palmer to Anchorage, or climatologists, or change agents from Chicago. We got to make sure that public safety is job number one for Alaskans.
Thank you. And we'll lead with you. Thank you, and we'll lead with you on this question. You guys are running obviously for a state office, but the federal government has played such a huge role in Alaska. Do you think that the Trump administration has been good for Alaska or bad?
You know, I was asked that question several weeks ago, and I was asked what I thought about President Trump, and I focused on the policies, and I gave him an 8 because we've opened ANWR. He's looking at deregulation. Unemployment is at record lows. African American unemployment is historic lows. I think those policies have been good for Alaska and will be good for Alaska. And I think you want to have a governor that's going to be able to work with this president, work with this administration, because I think if you do, good things are going to happen here in Alaska. I can see a lot of our regulations going by the wayside. I can see us developing more of our resources. We've got an issue here in Fairbanks with smoke, wood smoke. And I think working with that Trump administration and all of their agencies, I think Alaska is going to benefit greatly. So I think he's actually doing a pretty good job when it comes to these policies on resource development and regulations.
Thank you. Same question for you. Do you feel like the Trump administration has been good for Alaska or bad?
Well, I think there's been some good and some bad with any politician. For example, Anwar, I agree. That's a great move for us as Alaskans. I've always supported it. But I will tell you the other issue, and I'm very happy that missile defense, which affects this area, and all our military support that's going on from the Trump administration is positive. It follows up on a lot of the work that we did in the U.S. Senate to make sure the F-16s, F-35s, the Gray Eagles, the list goes on, are here. But on the flip side, the issue on the tax bill. Now, I will personally benefit from the tax bill. But the reality is it is now, the deficit of this country is now up to $1 billion or $1 trillion a year now. $1 trillion. It's tripled in the last 4 years. Who's going to pay that price? All of us. Interest rates have gone up every single quarter. Car rates, if you want to buy a car, have gone up every time you look at them now. There's no more zeros out there. On top of that, mortgage rates have gone up. We pay the price when there's a deficit that high. It's gone up triple in the last 3.5 years. That is not good for us. It's not good for the economy, and it's not good for any business person to have rates going up that high.
Thank you for that. And we'll lead with you on this question, Mr. Begich. Both of you obviously say that you support oil and gas development in Alaska, but what would you say specifically distinguishes you from your opponent as the best governor for the oil and gas industry in Alaska?
Am I first? Yes,
you're first.
Well, I would say my experience in working in the Senate on this issue, the Arctic, I remember people telling me when President Obama won, they said, well, you'll never open up the Arctic. MPRA would never open up. We worked. We worked across party lines because that's how you do it. You work with Democrats and Republicans to solve these issues. The Arctic was opened up for exploration. The other area of MPRA, which is now putting oil into our pipeline. When I came in the office, I remember that CD5 was stalled out because of EPA and the Corps of Engineers, and we were able to break through it. Those are the kind of things you need in order to make sure the federal government is responding to what we need with oil and gas. And there is no question, we're an oil and gas state, and we need to make sure we do the right job at the end of the day. But I can tell you that experience paid off significantly. And then when I was mayor, we have a utility company, Municipal Light and Power. We saw the future of investing in Beluga, and it ended up giving us incredible low rates for our community. So I've seen it from an administrative side, a legislative side, and that experience of working on both sides of the aisle make a big difference.
Thank you. And for you, Mr. Dunleavy, what distinguishes you from your opponent as the best governor for oil and gas in Alaska?
So when we had a tax bill revision called SB 21, I was the 11th vote for that tax bill. The theory behind that was if you had more investment on the slope, you'd get more oil. We had more investment on the slope, we got more oil. My opponent didn't answer the question many occasions when it was asked, where do you stand on SB 21? And I think the quote was, I don't want to go there at this time. What you'll get from me is when you ask a question, you'll get a straight answer. I'm not going to equivocate. I'm not going to BS. You're going to get a straight answer. So going forward, we're going to be looking at regulations and taxation policies to make sure that we have continual exploration and rolling development here in the state of Alaska. Oil is our lifeblood. It's a fact. And going forward, for some time, it's still going to be. And so you're going to have a governor that's going to make sure that we have industry that wants to invest in Alaska, that we have a stable environment to invest in Alaska, that we get our educational outcomes under control, our public safety outcomes under control. All of these things put together will invite industry to come to the state of Alaska, and we'll have more resource development, more jobs, and more wealth created.
Thank you. And we'll stay with you on answering this question. On the oil tax credit issue, if elected, will you continue to defend the state's position on House Bill 331 in court as to sell the bonds to pay off the credits, or do you have a different idea for how the state can deal with those outstanding credits?
Yeah, that was a bill that was passed, and it is in court. We're going to have to see how that turns out. I'm going to support our Constitution and our laws going forward. If the court decides that bill did not work, that it actually violated the Constitution, we'll go back to the drawing board with the oil companies, and we'll come up with some plan to be able to pay these credits off. We have to become a stable environment in the state of Alaska. We can't be an uncertain environment in the state of Alaska, or folks are not going to want to invest here. So we have to pay our debts. This is one of the reasons why I supported a full PFD, because it was in statute, it was the law, and people expected that. So going forward, you're going to have a governor, again, who's going to talk straight and make sure that we carry out, fulfill our laws and our obligations. And this is one that we'll work with the companies together on to come up with a plan if this bill falls to a court ruling.
Thank you. Mr. Begich, same question for you. How would you deal with this oil tax credit issue?
Yeah, first, I think the original part of that question was, would you continue if
yes.
in the court, and would the state support that effort if I was governor? Yes, it's in the court. The state needs to continue that lawsuit to get finality on it. Now, the next stage is if the courts decide it's unconstitutional, the debt is due. It must be paid. And the responsibility of the state is to work with the oil and gas industry that are affected on this to make sure we have a structured payment. But also, someone gave me an idea yesterday, that court process could take a period of time. But as we wait that accumulation of costs, I believe it's owed. So we need to be talking to them now to figure out if we can do a structured payment now while we're waiting for the court decision. Because once the court decides if it's allowed to be a bond, you still have to get it out there in the bond. It could take a long period of time to pay these back. If you believe it like I do, they're due, then you need to figure it out, and you might have two tracks doing it. While the court's going, you're working with the industry to figure out how to resolve this as quickly as possible so you don't accumulate additional costs.
I guess I'm just going to do it kind of freelance a follow-up for both of you on this one. So would you favor something like if the court strikes it down, a lump sum to clear as much as possible, or a structured, maybe above the statutory formula, which has been what was done over the last couple of years? And Mr. Begich, I'll let you go first on that one.
Well, it's an interesting process because it's in court, and you might be able to figure out a court settlement, which might be a way to get around the statute. But I would say, to do a lump sum would be difficult under our economic situation right now. That's just my guess. And once elected, I have a better view of the whole picture. But I would work immediately to try to figure out if we can get a short, structured payment stream while the court is really dealing with this. Because remember, if the court says yes, it's allowable to be a bond, it gives you a total amount. But if you already paid off some of it or negotiated some out, then you can lower that amount down. So either way, you want to do both tracks at the same time. Because honestly, the less you're in court, the less no disrespect to any attorneys here, but less we're paying a bunch of attorneys to solve this problem. I'd rather resolve it because I believe it's due. Let's figure it out and resolve it as quickly as possible. But if the courts say, yes, it's on a bond, again, get it out there, figure it out, but work on it today.
Yeah, same thing. Again, I'll be working with these companies to make sure that we repay our debt and our obligation. It's critical that we once again become a serious player if people are going to want to invest in the state of Alaska. This is important. If the court rules that this stands, then we pay it off with the bond process. If not, we've got to sit down quickly and work with the companies to see which method best works for paying this obligation off. It's got to be paid off. We've got to work with the companies. We've got to produce a stable environment in Alaska for future investment.
Right. Mr. Begich, we'll start with you on this one. On the Alaska LNG project, former Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson famously said Alaska is its own worst enemy on commercializing North Slope natural gas because the state changes governors every 4 years, which here we are again going to be changing governors after a single term. So with the permitting process underway and a plan to begin offering equity stakes in the project early next year, will you continue with the current leadership and board members of the Alaska Gasline Development Corporation, along with the plan to partner with China, or do you see a different path forward?
Yeah, let me first assume that, again, the pipeline project, I support it. I've supported it. The governor has done a heck of a job in bringing it to what I consider the 10-yard line of the opponent's field. Question is getting it over the goal line. I think there's an opportunity to do this. And I think it's going to be a lot of work. I think the issue around China, and again, I'm coming from we don't have all the information because some is confidential, so I want to put that out there. But I do think this has an opportunity. But it's close to the goal line. It's the furthest it's ever been in our history, and we should do everything we can to push it over. Now, working with China, we got to make sure we keep those relationships. Those are important because you just don't get those relationships overnight. Those are built over time. So we have to utilize the people that are in the operations today because they've built these relationships. So I think it's a project we're darn close. And we should do everything we can to push it over the line.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy, same for you. Do you see a different path forward than the one we're on now for the gas line?
That's a good question. So this project is cloaked in confidentiality agreements. We all know that. So it's difficult to get the answers to the questions that we all need to have. I mean, right now, we probably are doing more due process on looking for a toaster than we are this project, meaning we don't have the answers to all the questions. Do we want to monetize our gas? We all do. Do we want to make sure that we get a good return for our dollar when we invest in gas? Absolutely. Do we want cheaper energy for Alaskans? Absolutely. But the devil's in the details. How much is this going to cost us at the wellhead, the gas? What are the Asian countries willing to contract for? How long? Who's going to pay for any overruns? Who's going to pay for any upgrades in our infrastructure? There's a lot of questions. I want to monetize our gas. I really do. But we've got to get these questions answered before I say it's a go. I don't want to have, as my friend Click Bishop once said in a committee meeting, investing $65 billion to get a $45 billion return. We have to do this the right way.
Thank you. We'll stay with you on this question. This is something that you alluded to in a previous response. But the most densely populated areas of the Fairbanks and North Star Borough are in non-attainment with the federal air quality standards of the Clean Air Act. And so as a result of local elections earlier this month, air quality enforcement is now under control of the state. The Department of Environmental Conservation is already a year behind on delivering the state implementation plan to the EPA, and the sanctions clock will start running on January 1st, 2019. What can you do as the governor to prepare the state to mitigate the impact of these requirements on the economics of the community while pursuing attainment of the federal air quality standards in the non-attainment area?
Yeah, there's a couple issues embedded in that question. So the key to the future for, obviously, clean air is if we can get our gas resources here in Fairbanks and lower the cost of energy for folks. The issue with the EPA is, they've threatened to fine Alaska, they've threatened to sanction Alaska. I'd love to have a conversation with them as to what those sanctions or what those threats would actually be. One of the things I look forward to in working with the Trump administration is to have a discussion on what we're going to do with our air quality issues here in Fairbanks. Certainly, again, you want to have cleaner air. It's going to attract other investment here, other businesses, folks to move here. But the issue is, how do we do that without imposing a $200 or $300 million tax on the state of Alaska or the people here in Fairbanks in order to have the technological upgrades to deal with this air issue? So getting clean gas here as quickly as possible, making it cheaper for folks, and making sure that we have a discussion with the EPA so that we don't always react to the federal government every time they try and threaten us with something. Let's find out what those threats will actually be and see if we can work with the federal government on it.
Thank you. Mr. Begich, same question for you. How would you deal with the air quality issues in Fairbanks?
Well, first thing you need to do is you got to get an extension on the time that the EPA, because those are real, Mike, I will tell you, they are real fines. I worked in the Senate to move that date further and further away. This has to be moved first out as far as you can. Because to resolve this issue, you do have to have different kind of energy source here, maybe natural gas or alternative or renewable sources. Those are the things we have to figure out long term, because I don't think anyone in this community wants bad air. Also, DEC will get this responsibility because of their understaffing. This is not going to be probably a pretty top priority in the sense of enforcement. Our job has to be, first and foremost, move that deadline out, work with the EPA to figure this out, and then long term, figure out what we can do to make sure we have a better air quality in this community. You should not have bad air quality here. We should figure this out. But again, immediately, you must get this deadline pushed, because the federal government will tag us and they will fine us. So that's the realities. But again, pushing that off is important. Also, longer term, as we just talked about the pipeline issue, you do have to have a takeoff point for long-term value of that gas to this community.
Thank you. And I'm just going to add a 30-second follow-up on this question for both of you. So the Interior Energy Project, do you support what's happening with that right now? And what would you do to, I guess, sort of expedite? Because there's a huge issue as far as conversion costs for individual homes. Even if folks wanted to convert, it can be very expensive. So do you support what's going on with the IEP? And what sort of support could you offer to homeowners or residences who want to convert? Mr. Begich, you can go first.
I know there's a little back and forth up here on the project, but I do believe that it's the right way to bring natural gas. You got to get natural gas within this community. The problem is, if you all debt finance it, there's no way a homeowner can afford it. That's the reality. So the state has to participate in some way, and that's why I go back to my idea on the capital budget. This is a perfect kind of project to figure out how to engage the capital budget long term, because if you don't lower the cost, the individual homeowner will not be able to afford even the hookup to it, and that is the problem. So we got to solve that. That gets us down the road to make sure they have clean burning fuel.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy?
Again, I think gas is the future for Fairbanks and the rail belt as well, and other remote parts of the state of Alaska. The question is, how do we drive down the cost? It really comes down to an issue of cost. That's why people are burning wood. It's cheaper for the right now to burn wood than it is to use oil. So driving down that cost, making sure that the project is as efficient as possible, is managed as well as possible, and get the cheapest cost for gas here in Fairbanks is what the goal should be. I went out there and took a look at the project yesterday. It's moving along nicely. We just have to make sure that the cost, to the degree possible, are as low as possible so people can afford this going forward.
Thank you. Mr. Begich, we'll start with you on this question. Obviously, this goes back, an issue that goes back to your time as mayor in Anchorage, but the Port of Alaska, renamed, provides obviously the state and nationwide benefits with the cargo reaching 85% of Alaska, half of it to deliver to destinations outside of Anchorage. It's also one of 23 strategic Defense Department seaports, and its docks are failing. Corrosion and will cause some of these piers to be or unsafe within 10 years. So there's a general agreement, I think, across the board that something has to be done about this. So you, as governor, how would you help rebuild the Port of Alaska's failing docks, and how would you fund that?
I would use, as I said, on the capital budget, this is that's why you have to do this 6-year plan, because if you do these 1-year increments, you can never get these major projects done. A 6-year capital budget utilizing the $70 to $100 million of current resources of the state on an annualized basis can produce a $2 billion plus capital budget. But also the Port of Anchorage has to participate, and there are opportunities. For example, when they move fuel from the port down and into their terminals and elsewhere, they charge about 1/10 of 1 penny. That produces $14 million. If they adjusted that by about 2/10 of 1 penny, that money matched with a grant could finish out that port over a 6-year period. That's how you do it. I've been underneath those docks. I've seen it. I've walked those docks. This is critical for us long term.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy, your plan for the Port of Alaska?
I think there's a number of options. I took a tour of the port as well. The other side at Port McKenzie is also failing. So those two ports are actually falling apart. We need to fix them as soon as possible. There's a number of different ways we can approach this. We can approach it through a capital budget. We can approach it through a private-public partnership. I know for a fact that there are equity firms, both here in the United States and in other countries, that would love to invest in that port. There may be a discussion with the municipality on co-management of those ports, but in the end, we just have to have the discussion, make the decision going forward, fix these ports, but there are a number of options, including state help, state partnerships, local partnerships, and partnerships with private equity firms.
Thank you. Now we've reached a segment of the forum here where we're going to ask some questions specific to each candidate. Mr. Begich, I'm going to lead off with you. Now, just a reminder, you'll have 1 minute. Mr. Dunleavy will have 30 seconds to respond to you, and then you will get an additional 30 seconds following that, and then we'll just alternate back and forth for these couple questions. So, Mr. Begich, you've said that the oil industry needs stability in the production tax system, but you're also supporting ballot measure 1, and more than 500 organizations, including this one who's hosting and the AFL-CIO who just endorsed you, are opposing the measure. So how do you reconcile favoring stability on taxes while also favoring a measure that could create instability for oil and other resource industries in Alaska?
Well, first off, you're right. I do support Prop 1. 45,000 people signed an initiative to put it on the ballot. We can argue over the issues, and that I met with AOGA yesterday. They gave a great presentation. It was short. We didn't have a lot of time. But I will tell you this. The issue on this initiative, there's two choices. I mean, I'm one vote. You all get to vote. Whatever ends up, if it passes, the question is, what do we do? If it doesn't pass, the issue's over. But if it passes, the question is, what do you do next? How do you solve this problem? Because it's going to be in front. You got to go through a regulatory process, and then you have to go through the process if there's any amendments necessary. And to be very frank, I'm not worried about the Republicans if there's changes to be needed for this in the legislature. It's the Democrats. Being a Democrat sitting in the governor's office gives me capacity to work with these folks, solve this problem. I do not want this, if it passes, to interfere in the sense of what I've heard from people, and that is that it could delay projects. If it delays projects and uses a tool to delay projects, I will do everything I can, if it passes, to amend it to make sure it doesn't do that.
Thank you. You have 30 seconds, Mike.
This initiative, if passed, would be a disaster for the state of Alaska. I think it would impact all kinds of problems. Current projects on the slope in terms of oil, mining projects, potential hydro projects, potential sewer and water projects for municipalities, road projects, drainage projects, you name it. I think this would be a disaster. And really, part of having a stable environment is projecting to the world that you're open for business. Not that you're closed for business, or you might be closed for business, or tomorrow you might be open, the next day you might be closed, if it passes, if it doesn't pass. This is a disaster for the state of Alaska. I'm a firm, I repeat, a firm no on this.
Thank you. You have 30 seconds, Mr.
Again,
Begich.
here's the question. The question is, may we support it or not individually? If it passes, the question is, who is going to be the one sitting at the table to help solve this problem? Mike, you were kicked out of your caucus. The reality is, Democrats, you're never going to have access. We have to figure this out, bring everyone together and not sit around and say, well, if it passes, good luck, that's how it works. No, because we have to sit down to make sure this works. Bring both sides to the table. Bring the stakeholders to the table. This is what's wrong with our political process. It's this or that, never figuring out together, and this issue's on the ballot. Even when we weren't running, it's on the ballot. The question is, what happens afterwards if it passes?
All right, thank you. We'll start with you on this one, Mr. Dunleavy. The PFD has obviously been a big issue in this election, and you favor paying the PFD according to the current statutory formula, although that's obviously been ignored in the legislature and by the governor's veto over the past 3 years. So how will you work with the legislature to keep this promise, and would you veto a budget that comes to you that does not have a dividend that is funded according to the formula?
So I'm talking with legislators right now about this issue, and the feedback has been pretty promising. We have about $18.8 billion in the earnings reserve. When this conversation started a couple of years ago, we had about $7 billion in the earnings reserve. We can pay this full statutory PFD out and still have plenty of money in that earnings reserve and grow that earnings reserve. The issue really is about trust, and that's what it seems that's the theme with the questions. Does industry trust this to be a reliable partner in the state of Alaska? Do our own people trust this to be a reliable outfit in the state of Alaska, government in the state of Alaska? You just mentioned that we ignored our laws. When I'm governor, we are not going to ignore any laws. We're not going to ignore any statutes. If there's going to be changes to the permanent fund or the PFD, the people of Alaska need to be involved. It's not difficult to have an advisory vote. It's not difficult to have a discussion with the people of Alaska. We can afford a full PFD moving forward.
Would you consider a veto if the budget comes to you without the formula?
I would have to consider at that moment whether we need to veto the budget to make sure that the people of Alaska can have trust in their government. I'd have to give that serious consideration.
Thank you. 30 seconds for you to respond, Mr. Begich.
Well, I'm not sure what your answer was there, but let me be very clear here. There's a clear difference between our proposals on permanent fund and Mike's. And ours puts it into the Constitution using the percent of market value, not at 5.25%, but at 4%, a more reasonable amount. Puts it aside, gets it out of hands of politicians so they don't mess around with it every single year. Because here's what's going to happen. Every single session, they will debate how big the permanent fund dividend is for political reasons. We should put that off the table. Also, taking money out of the earnings reserve, that is basically bankrupting our future. This is what they did to the constitutional budget reserve, $14 billion gone, 80%. Now, he wants to go after the earnings reserve. We're going to be in a world of hurt from a decade from now.
You have 30 seconds.
I want to follow the law. The proposal you put forward cuts the PFD. You have to be honest with the people of Alaska going forward. This is an issue of trust. There's a budget gap in Juneau, but there's a bigger gap in trust. Follow your laws, engage the people of Alaska. The interesting thing about the permanent fund, and actually any bill in Alaska, is we have an initiative and repeal process in our Constitution. If the people of Alaska don't get behind a fiscal plan, they have the right to repeal what we do. And thus, we still have instability moving forward. That's the issue. Engage the people of Alaska, have them as part of this decision. We're going to have a stable fiscal plan if we do.
Thank you. This one will go to you, Mr. Begich, and I appreciate you bringing up your plan on the earnings reserve. So you've proposed transferring $14 billion out of the earnings reserve to the principal of the fund, which would leave about $4 billion in change in the earnings reserve. Have you had any economists run simulations on what would happen if the fund experienced a similar loss to 2009, given that any losses would all come out of the earnings reserve, and so if you lost $3.5 billion, you would the balance of the earnings reserve could be wiped out under what you're proposing?
Not on a simulation of 2009, which is the worst recession we've ever had in this country, but let me make it very clear. Here's why you got to take money out of the earnings reserve, because the legislative bodies cannot help themselves. They took 80% of the Constitution budget reserve, gone. If they were to put that into the corpus of the fund today and use the percent of market value, there would be no deficit. But they didn't. They could not help themselves but to take the money off the table, one-time money for operational expenses. As a business owner, I've been since the age of 14, you are business owners, that is absolutely reckless. Now, they'll have $18 billion with a simple majority of the vote of the legislature. What do you think they're going to do? I know what they're going to do. I'm only basing it on history. They will peel that back, and over time, there won't be enough for a dividend, and there won't be enough to fund our government in the proper way. That is dangerous, and you already heard it from his explanation earlier that, oh, there's plenty in there. We'll just take some of that. That is reckless for the long-term health of this state. Maybe short-term it's great because you get a check, but for the next generation, it is dangerous.
I wanted to just kind of follow. So have you had any economists?
Not on the 2000. No, I answered that.
Not versus 2009
Oh,
because that was just sort of an example. But there's ways to run simulations for stock returns. You haven't had anybody.
We've done it in the sense of not an economist, but I've used a lower ratio. Instead of 5.25%, I dropped it to 4%. Which for foundations is the right number to use. The 5.25 is irresponsible over the long haul. You cannot sustain a corpus of the fund or the earnings reserve with those kind of withdrawals.
Okay.
This has to be a strong, balanced approach. And so I've tried to put that out there and get it out of the hands of these guys who have shown through history how to take money one time and spend it on operating expenses, and that's dangerous.
Thank you. And Mr. Dunleavy,
I'm learning how to interpret things. That was a no, by the way.
No, that's correct.
I
did not use an economist. You're absolutely
just trying to
right,
help the
Mike.
folks out,
And
understand
I'm
what's
sure
going
you
on,
haven't
Mark.
used an economist
That
on
was
your
a no.
proposals.
That was a no, folks.
So you have 30 seconds to
That was a
respond
no.
to his plan.
Just like
Yeah.
I'm a no on this, that was a no. So you aren't going to have this kind of problem if you have a governor in the office that submits a lower budget, and if the legislature wants to increase that budget, and the other party worked at increasing that budget, you veto those items unless they are primary government functions in this fiscal climate. You fund your public safety, you fund your education, you fund your management of your natural resources, and you fund your transportation. If there's a fast rail study that comes up from the legislature, I'm not going to allow that to get through and go into the earnings reserve to pay for that. If it's a climatologist, if it's any kind of crazy study, it's not going to happen. You have to have the right governor in place.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Begich, we'll be back on track with your 30 seconds to respond to that.
I'm not sure you answered the question about the earnings reserve. And
I
here's again, I'll say it again, 18 billion. I don't trust these guys. They have shown that they will spend the money. You have to, as an executive, as a mayor when I was mayor, and as governor, you have to take the lead and pull these things off the table so they don't recklessly spend, because at the end of the day, we have to provide police, fire, all the services you need, road maintenance, education, and the only way you do that is make sure you have sustainable budget.
Veto silly stuff as the governor.
Well,
All
let
right.
me,
We're
but
gonna get
I'm
back
going to
on track
respond.
here.
He got a quick response. I'm going to give you a quick one.
Yeah, go.
The items you listed were in the capital budget. Operation budget, you got to veto the whole thing or not. And that is the difference between an operation budget and a capital budget.
All right, thank you. This question is for Mr. Dunleavy. And it regards commercial fishing, and there was the forum earlier this week where you did not appear, and there's many people in the commercial fishing industry that are concerned about you as governor because of Bob Penny's support and because some of the actions in the legislature regarding the sport and commercial conflicts in Cook Inlet. So, what would you say to reassure the commercial fishing industry that you would treat them fairly as far as policy and things like board appointments and things of that nature?
I've had those conversations, and I continue to have those conversations. We have folks in the commercial fishing industry that actually work in our campaign for our campaign, that have donated to our campaign, that are working with us now. We've met with groups of commercial fishermen from Juneau, Ketchikan, and the Kenai. We continue to work with these groups. Commercial fishing is a big, broad umbrella. We're having discussions with them, but I've told them, as I told everyone else, including in the sports fishing arena, we're going to be fair. We're going to work together to solve issues. We're going to hire the right kinds of people. We've asked these various groups to actually send us profiles of folks that should sit on boards, should sit as commissioner. So we're having a great dialogue, and we have a lot of commercial fishermen that support our campaign.
Thank you. 30 seconds for you, Mr. Begich.
I was in Kodiak on Monday. I was, I guess, a debate of one, and it was interesting. Kodiak has experienced an amazing downturn in their fishing industry this year. They were anxious to have us there to have this conversation. First time they've ever canceled in the history of their debate and not have someone of a major candidate declining, which is shocking. People were upset. Commercial industry is an important part of our fishing industry. Both sports, commercial is an important part of our economy in this state. You have to continue to have these conversations in order to make sure this continues to grow. They had a lot of great issues that they wanted to talk to Mike about, but I was happy to do it myself.
30 seconds for you, Mr. Dunleavy.
Again, we continue to have conversations. We continue to have discussions. It's a big state. Our campaign is getting out in rural Alaska, urban Alaska, meeting folks. We've been all over the state of Alaska. Again, I've been to more debates than Mark has, more forums. I've had a bunch of public meetings. Again, I was in rural Alaska yesterday, scheduled to be there. And we continue to work with the commercial fishing industry in terms of solving these issues. And again, there's a whole bunch of folks in the commercial industry that are supporting our campaign.
Thank you. This will be a question for both candidates, and we'll start with you, Mr. Dunleavy. There's a common complaint about government that it doesn't operate the way private businesses do. And when Conoco lost $4 billion in 2015, the company cut its dividend by 2/3, which allowed it to continue building projects in Alaska, such as Greater Moose's Tooth 1, that it's now paying off by producing oil. Should the dividend function in a similar way as being more tied to the budget situation versus the performance of the fund, in that that's more tied to the Alaska economy than the fund, which is very independent of the Alaska economy?
I don't think so. I think you have a fund that acts independently of the government. It's based upon market performance. I see it more as a transfer than an appropriation.
Okay, thank you. 1 minute for you, Mr. Begich.
No, I support the percent of market value. I think that's the right formula to utilize. I think it's dangerous if you start letting it engage like it is now in the politics. You know, for years, it really wasn't debatable what the dividend would be or not be. Now it's become the political debate in the legislature, which if we do not solve this problem and getting out of the hands of the elected officials in Juneau, here's what happens. We got to solve all these issues of crime and education and what we're going to do about unemployment and growing the economy, dealing with the oil and gas industry. You pick the list. But if you're stuck in the mode of arguing over how big the dividend is, and these guys will do it, we won't get to the big issues that this state desperately needs to deal with. We are in this trap of every session just having session debates. We are better than that. Alaska is better than that. We have to look at the longer-term vision of where we're going. And if we're in this trap of what is right politically or not with the dividend, we will end up never moving Alaska forward to what its potential is. So I like the formula, and I want to constitutionalize it so it's off the deck.
Thank you. Okay, now we are at the lightning round as we're nearing the roundup here. So you have your yes or no's in front of you. Now these are all going to be questions about different kinds of taxes. So you just hold up yes or no, depending on whether you would support a tax of these kinds. So the very first one, would you support an income tax? Okay, would you support a payroll tax? Oh, sorry. Yes. Would you support a sales tax?
Depends if it's seasonal.
Would you support increased taxes on oil industry? Would you support an increase in the motor fuel tax? Would you support an increase in the mining tax?
In the what tax?
Mining, yes. And then finally, an increase in the fishing tax.
Mike, you got to say you did. You got to say you did.
Yeah. So let's see. So it looked like, Mr. Begich, you held up yes on a couple of those, and I was wondering if you could kind of explain why you support those, either an income tax or I guess what was the other one, the sales tax?
Seasonal.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not, actually this is a yes or no is hard because when I talk about revenue issues for filling the gap, we have to have sustainable levels. I'm not sure which one is the right mix, to be very frank with you, but in order to get something, you have to have some sustainable revenue stream. And no matter what the price of oil is today, and I heard Mike say it earlier, we cannot continue to say, well, it's $78 today, let's do the budget. You cannot do that. We have to pick a number based on an average and what's realistic. Today it's at 63, maybe it's 65, 66, but at the end of the day, you do need a third component of revenue. So you're not balanced against the market, oil, you got to have a third. And also, with $2 billion from people who do not live in this state, 20% of our workforce who don't live in this state pay nothing. We subsidize them, and we need to make sure they pay their fair share because I'm not tired of paying for people who come up here, take our jobs, and go south and pay nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Dudley.
So I'm going to help Mark here. So Mark, I never said that the oil price was sustainable. The thing you got to be careful about with taxes is you got to make sure you're managing your budgets well and your government well first. Are we going to tax people if we have a poorly run government? I don't think the people of Alaska would stand for that. We have to have transparency in our budgeting. We have to be able to demonstrate to the people of Alaska that we're actually using the money that we have and getting the outcomes that we want. Because if we just throw a tax together, what does that look like? How much is that tax? What percentage? Who's excused from that tax? I've got lobbyists telling me they'd love for us to tax because they're going to go to Juneau, get new clients, and be able to exempt their clients from the tax. It's very important that we manage this government first well.
Thank you, Mr. Dunleavy. So we're down to the last question before closing, and want to just have a little bit of fun with this since Halloween is coming up next week. So if there was a costume that would best describe your campaign, what would it be? Mr. Begich, I'll let you take a crack at that.
You know that commercial, The Most Interesting Man? I'd say this campaign is the most interesting campaign I've ever seen, so I tried to figure that out in a costume.
Okay, Mr. Dunleavy, do you have an idea for a
Wow.
costume that would sum up your campaigns?
I can help you.
No, that's okay, Mark. I was thinking Mark would be good as Dracula, sucking the lifeblood from Alaska, but I won't go there.
And I thought you were... now, let's be fair. I get to do one, right? Do I? In fairness of the questions, I get to do
Mark, but you're always saying stuff between the questions. You know, it's 6'7". It's 6'7". It's hard to. I always had a problem doing Halloween. I'd put a mask on, knock on a door, and the neighbor would go, "I done, lady, take the mask off. We know it's you." Just an honest. I don't know how to answer that. Just an honest broker. Just an honest broker. I think that would probably surprise the heck out of folks coming out of Juneau.
All right, well, thank you. All right, well, we've arrived at time for closing remarks, and as I mentioned up top, based on the coin flip, we will have Mr. Begich go first on closing statements with 1 minute.
Again, thank you to the Chamber for putting this on and all the sponsors, and for the students that are back there. Hopefully they got an entertainment a little bit and education in the process. But let me say this. Now, don't take that out of my time. I got to be careful. But you know, this is an important election. You heard a little bit what I just said about the future. You know, we battle on the issues of today, and I get it. You know, we got to deal with the permanent fund dividend. We have to deal with some of these other issues of the budget. But the real question is, what are we doing today to ensure those millennials who are leaving at the fastest rate of any population in our state, the 3,000 people that left our state last year, the young person I met in a village who's a 9th grader who sees no hope of their future in this state. We have to build the dream that they have in their eyes every single day. We have to do things together and quit dividing us. This toxic world we live in politics, Alaska can lead in the way that's much different than ever before. Working with Democrats, Republicans, rural, urban, figuring out how we're going to improve our education system, fighting crime, making sure we have an economy that's growing and vibrant. That's what I want to do. Thank you very much for this time, and I look forward to any questions afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dunleavy, you have 1 minute.
We have a tremendous opportunity here in Alaska in the next 13 days on November 6th. Actually, you can start voting now. A tremendous opportunity. Are we going to be in Alaska that is going to continue to grow our social service programs, our welfare programs? Are we going to be in Alaska that's eventually going to turn into one gigantic park? I think that's the fear of a lot of folks in this room and a lot of folks on the campaign trail. We have an opportunity to have somebody as governor that's going to make sure that they don't take money out of your pockets unnecessarily. We're going to have a governor when I'm elected to make sure that this government is managed well. This is an incredible opportunity to get Alaska back on track, to utilize our resources, to create jobs, create wealth, create revenue for the state of Alaska. We don't have to go down this welfare track that we've been going down the last couple of years. We have over 45,000 able-bodied Alaskans on Medicaid. We have record numbers of folks on food stamps, yet we're the richest state in the country in terms of resources. The lower 48 is booming, and we're being left behind. You get the right governor in there, we'll put Alaska back on track. We'll get Alaska headed for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. With that, I just want to say once again, thank you to the candidates for being here and for all your responses. Thank you to Curtis and the Alaska Chamber, the Fairbanks Chamber for inviting me here. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Curtis.
There's no one between us.
Thank you, Andrew, for doing a great job. We had worked on questions, and then last Friday we had to completely try to come up with and figure out how to fill that time. So I do appreciate you and coming up and able to do that for us. I was remiss in a couple of acknowledgments, and that is we do have 50 students from West Valley High School government class here in the back of the room. I want to thank you. We also have two very distinguished Alaskans who are both former chairs of the Alaska Chamber who will be tonight. We have our Alaskan of the Year Award, and we have Governor Frank Murkowski and Nancy in the audience. And we also have Governor Sheffield. And for Governor Sheffield, he now has another title, author. And he turned 90 years old. There he is at the door. And there's a table as you exit. He'll be having books available for sale for $25, a memoir. I believe it's from the Depression to the Governor's Mansion and beyond. And thank you, Bill, for attending, and thank you for making your book available to us. For those wishing to stay, we do have a lineup with Congressman Young, Aaron Shute, Karen Wolf. We have Major General Mark O'Neill, Lynn Russ Henderson, and Governor Murkowski this afternoon. And this evening we do have awards gala back here tonight at 7. And if you don't have tickets, you can sign up and get tickets outside. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for attending. And we need to have the room cleared so we can get ready. And we're going to reconvene here back at 1:30. But thank you very much for making this a success.